Welcome to NCBI Labs. So it's good to be back for another live event this week. Today we're going to be talking about quite an important subject at the moment. It's one that we flagged last week that we're going to be discussing this week. We're going to be talking about the COVID Tracker app. What does it do? And how does it work? Well, we're going to be discussing that in just a few moments' time. And we're going to have some guests to help us out with that as well. We're going to have our Chief Technology Officer, Karen O'Mahony, back with us for that section as well. But we're also going to be talking to the product manager for the COVID Tracker app, Ireland app, Garma Creasta, along with the rest of our regular panel as well, Sean, Daniel, JP and myself. So that's quite an important subject that we're going to be talking about today. So stay tuned for that. That's just coming up in just a moment. And then later on, we're going to be continuing our series of Seeing It Your Way interviews. Now, last week, we were able to hear from Stuart Lawler. If you didn't get a chance to hear that one, be sure to check it out on our podcasts or on YouTube. I'm sure you'll enjoy that as well. But you'll also enjoy today's interview with Mark Kehoe, an NCBI service user who's going to be chatting about his experience with JP a little bit later on. Just a reminder that if you've got any questions or comments, particularly about the COVID Tracker app, well, now's your chance. We already have some questions and comments in, which we'll be sure to cover throughout our show. But there's still an opportunity. If you want to ask any questions about it, please do feel free to use that Q&A panel on the right-hand side if you're using Microsoft Teams, or just drop us an email at labs@ncbi.ie. That's labs@ncbi.ie. And we'll be sure to either try and answer them today if we can, and if we can't get an answer immediately today, then we'll try and make sure that we get back to you and get an answer for you over the next week. So without any further ado, let's actually start off straight away with this first subject of the COVID-19 app that's out there, the COVID Tracker app. And we're delighted to welcome Garma Creasta, the product manager for the COVID Tracker Ireland app, to the show. And also we're going to welcome back Karen O'Mahony, who's going to lead the discussion now with the rest of our panel as well. So we'll just pass over to Karen and to Gar.
Thanks very much, Jude. It's good to be back.
Great to have you back.
Live event. Everyone's doing a great job so far. I can't believe we've done 15 of these through the COVID-19 crisis. So it's been a great journey for us in the NCBI. I think today is a really important segment on our technology event. It's something that we spoke of quite some time ago when it was announced that Google and Apple were working on an API to support the fight against COVID-19. And we discussed that many, I think that was way back in event number 7 or 8, and we're already up to 15. And I'm thrilled to welcome the product manager for the Irish implementation of this application, the COVID-19 Tracker app for Ireland, Garma Creasta. Gar, welcome along to the technology event today.
Thanks a million, Karen. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's great to have you here. Just to give people some background before we jump into the kind of the Q&A side of things. So the NCBI reached out to the HSE to work with you guys directly on this app, given its importance. And I do firmly believe this is probably the most important app to be released in Ireland. And you know, you guys were really eager to make your app as accessible as possible to the disability community, and specifically people with visual impairments. So we worked together before the app was released to make sure that was the case. And firstly, before we kick off, I just wanted to say, like, I really commend the effort that has gone in to make the app be as accessible as possible. So that's something I think that you and your team and the HSE should be really proud of.
And I guess, Karen, from our perspective, I mean, it was great to be able to work with you guys and the effort you guys put in, the hours that went into this, because I think this is one of those interesting projects that just pops up. It's kind of a one in a lifetime. So you got asked, can you help? It was something nobody really truly understood. We were kind of working through it and working together, and you guys were amazing all the way through it in terms of helping us, and also helping us understand from an accessibility perspective, how do we make this thing work as best possible for everybody?
Cool. So, do you know what? I think, let's take a little step back and talk about. Firstly, I mean, just so everyone that's listening into us now can get a sense of. Tell me, what is the COVID Tracker Ireland app? Just tell me from a layman's perspective why I should download this app and why it's important and what it does.
Sure. So from a layman's perspective, so the COVID Tracker app is a pandemic response app. So it's designed to help the HSE respond to the needs of the pandemic. It does three primary jobs. So the first and foremost one, and the one that's gotten the most attention, is contact tracing. And contact tracing is the process of understanding when somebody does get infected, who they've come into contact with. And the quicker we make that contact and the more comprehensive we make that is the approach that public health has taken for generations in terms of shortening and limiting the spread of any particular infection in any population. So the actual technique and contact tracing itself is not a brand new thing. It's an age-old thing. It's something that's been going on for generations. And what the app does is help in two different ways, specifically to do with contact tracing. The first is it speeds up the time it takes to notify somebody. So if in the event, Karen, that you get tested, and if you're unfortunate enough to test positive with COVID-19, you'll receive a call from the HSE and asking you to, first off, telling you that you've tested positive, giving you some help around that, then asking you to upload these random identifiers from your phone. And these are pieces of information that are unique and distinct to you, but they're anonymous, so they don't identify you in any way. And it allows you to share these with everybody else who's using the COVID Tracker app. And should anybody have been in contact with you, it helps us accelerate that. So even for people that you know, so if it's a brother, mother, father, sister, it helps us tell them faster that they've come into contact with somebody who has tested positive. It doesn't say who, it doesn't say where, it doesn't specifically say when, but what it does tell you is it tells you that you have come into contact, and depending on what you've chosen, it helps you make decisions as to what you do next, and it's following public health guidance. So the contact tracing piece, so that's one. The other one is for those situations where it's we call them non-intimate contacts. So it's somebody who you don't know who they are. So you couldn't possibly tell somebody in the HSE who they are. So for situations like that, because of the way
would that be like maybe being on a bus or something, on public transport or something like that, maybe?
Yeah, think of it even in a cafe. If you're standing beside somebody in a queue for something. So if you're standing beside somebody in a queue, if you're in a cafe and you're sitting not too far, if you're at a meeting, so if you're meeting somebody and it could be in a business context, but you don't know that person's name and you couldn't list them as a close contact if somebody was to call you, this will allow that piece of information to be shared and that person to be notified if they have come into contact with somebody who's tested positive for COVID-19. So that's kind of the contact tracing piece. So the app serves two other purposes as well. So the next one is really as a source of news and information. So it's the ability for us to be able to give you, and I think everybody was early on, and I think we had talked about this before, we were all transfixed with the headline numbers. So how many new cases, how many people in hospital, how many people in ICU, and as that number kept ramping up, as the numbers come down, so what we're doing at the moment is providing that information in the app, and I think that's something that we've got a lot of feedback on with relation to what people are looking to find out and looking to know. So we were publishing headline numbers out there because we thought they would be interesting and of use to people, and it turns out that they are of use, but people have other requirements from an information perspective to help them understand what's going on and also make decisions about things as well. And on that, we also include information about the usage of the app, and it's really to try and help people understand, because at the moment, I think we're up around I'd say we're heading towards 1.3 million people who've onboarded on the app at the moment, which has been at an insane pace, and it's way in excess of what we anticipated in terms of just the speed of uptake in this. There was obviously an appetite there, and people felt it was important that they stay safe and protect each other, and that's been the core piece in this. So as we go through this process, it's getting people up and running and understanding that as this network grows, the more people who are actually using it, the more coverage we have, and the easier it is to notify people should they have come into contact with somebody else. So it really is that piece, but this very much works at a micro level as well. And I think the last bit is one of the things that happens when if you're being tested for COVID or you suspect you've got it, if you ring your GP or if you call into HSE Live, is that somebody will ask you questions about, do you have a cough? Do you have a fever? Have you lost sense of smell or taste in the past 14 days? So you'll be asked questions like this, and a common challenge that people face is pinpointing when this has happened. So trying to understand when symptom onset, and symptom onset is an important date from an infection perspective, because you've got this window where you're highly infectious when you get COVID-19, and from a public health perspective, it's trying to identify when that is. And also people's memories are fragile. So I couldn't tell you, did I have a cough last Wednesday? Well, I could now because I've got the app, but for a lot of people, they couldn't tell you when it happened, and it's trying to pinpoint that piece of information. So providing a way for people to record symptoms that they've had on an ongoing basis, and it kind of generates awareness as well for people that these are symptoms, and if I do notice it, it's something that happens. And we're seeing probably day on day, somewhere between 250 and 350,000 people are checking in with the app and sharing their symptomatic data. And we're working with the Central Statistics Office to be able to visualize that. So that data helps inform a national picture, and it's part of a process. So there's some wonderful words in public health: syndromic surveillance, which is looking at the evolution of a disease within a population. So when we get this data set, it's actually informing from a public health policy and an epidemiology perspective. It's helping build up this picture, and it's not an isolated data set. It's part of this overall piece of all the data that we're capturing through many different channels to figure out what's going on in the country. And I think a lot of people were checking in, and there was a novelty factor, but we've seen a repeat of a lot of people still checking in. I think one of the interesting things with this is for sporting organizations and religious organizations, a lot of the return to play protocols or return to service protocols have revolved around monitoring and tracking symptoms and understanding where that fits. So I think this is it's not designed specifically for that, but it can certainly serve a purpose within the context of something like that.
So essentially, there's three core functions. We have the contact tracing, which is hugely important just for managing any spread of an infectious disease. We have the informations on the virus itself. So, and I think that for me as a member of the public and not someone that works in technology, is just have a single source of truth, on my phone that I can check at a glance, I think is huge. And then obviously symptom checking and logging is hugely important. That they would be the three core functions of the COVID Tracker app.
Exactly, and there are other. So there's one other function which I think is probably worth mentioning, in that we have implemented a leave function. So if somebody decides that they want to leave, they go into settings, they click leave, they're asked to confirm, and then they're gone. So we scrub everything. You're basically back to the very beginning again, and it's as if you never existed to the COVID Tracker app, to the extent that the app knows about you. I think there's a piece here which is we can kind of dive into the technology around it, but there's the bit that we manage and there's the bit that Google and Apple provide in terms of an infrastructure for contact tracing, which is the Google and Apple exposure notification system. So we can jump into that. So
why don't we? I think it's important we talk through the development process for this, because I mean our audience essentially is people who are interested in technology. They're people who use it as an enabler in their day-to-day lives. So that's why we provide this technology event. It's so important for people with sight loss to have access to the right technology. And one of the things that I wanted to get across today is how we worked on the accessibility side of things. But I think to give our audience a perspective of how app development works, and I've worked on many apps and before, some successful and some not successful. But given the importance of an app like this, I mean, one thing I would say is 1.3 million downloads that was in 2 weeks. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest apps ever launched in Ireland, I would suspect. So
we had, we had 1 million within 48 hours. And I'd say it was probably on under 40 hours, we had 1 million people up on the platforms. And so that was the first thing. And to put it in context, I think somebody said it the other day, Twitter has 1.6 million app users in the country.
Yeah.
So just to give a sense, so we're still growing. So it's obviously there was the immediate spike and a lot of people came on board, but we're seeing daily steady increase in progress through that. And it is just following that curve. But I guess to go back to your question in terms of the development process, and this is, so I'm going to name check a couple of people and thank them for the privilege of ending up in here. But
well, actually, I think before you name check the people involved, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. So
Sure.
you're in terms of your own role, just so everyone knows, on the actual this application. So you were the product manager. Was that for the app and the website, or was that just tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved, and then we'll move on to the broader team maybe.
And that was the name checking. So there's a guy called Tim Willoughby who's the head of innovation and digital on Garda Síochána. And so the guards were involved in this early on, and they were helping, and my name basically came up in conversation as I think we need guard to help here. I was like, okay. And that was kind of the starting point. So this, and to give everybody a sense of the timing on this, so this was the 18th of March this year is when this whole thing started. So it's in that week. So it actually started on Paddy's Day, ironically. So it started on Paddy's Day, and it has gone at 1,000,000 miles an hour since then. And the role at that point was to try and figure it out. Well, initially, we had a problem to solve, which is if COVID-19 scales the way it's scaling, so if it spreads as quickly as it looks like it's spreading, how do we address that, and how do we support contact tracing in a digital way? So at this point, Apple and Google weren't even on the pitch.
I was just going to say that was the API even announced to be in development at that point?
No.
Wow.
So it didn't get announced until it was probably, I think we were 3 to 4 weeks into the project at that point before, and we were in conversations with Apple and Google at that time. And then
tell me, who was the project team back then? I mean, because I've been in situations like this before where you're handed a product, or it's a product that doesn't exist, and someone will say, I have this idea. Now your situation is slightly more focused than that, but we need to make it work. And initially, when you have to lead a project like that, and particularly as a product manager, your reaction is, holy F, how am I going to do this? So, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. That's the reality. You sit there looking very calm and collected, and then in the back of your mind, you're going, holy mother, expletive inserted. How am I actually going to deliver that? So there must have been a sense of that as wait, I'm now the guy that has to deliver this. What am I going to do? So tell me about the team. Tell me about, how you reacted when you were given the nod that, you're the product manager for potentially the biggest app that Ireland's seen.
So unfortunately, I've got a character flaw which attracts me to things like this. If it's a chaotic situation, I kind of feel like I should be somewhere in the middle of it. So in this particular situation, I got a call from the CIO, Fran Thompson, in the HSE, and said, asking me, would I lead out on this? And I said yes. There was no role definition. In fact, the idea of product management is it's a recently added thing into this whole mix, in that if as we were looking back over it, and product management, I think, is one of those things that it gets hyped and then it disappears, and it gets hyped and it gets disappeared. And I'm an architect by training, I guess, and by profession for a long time. So I've worked as an enterprise architect and solution architect, and you name it, any kind of architect you care to mention. So that mix of skills in terms of understanding what the need is from a business perspective, the ability to translate that into technology options and figure out how do we solve for a particular problem, and helping people understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve for. That's kind of core to like a lot of the work that I've done over the years and most of my career. So that was kind of where I was coming from and how I got thrown into it.
Were you with the HSE at the time, or were you with Garda Síochána?
No, I was with so I've been working with the HSE since late 2018. I started, and I've worked on a variety of things in there, from innovation to portfolio management, application portfolio management to it's a mixed bag. It's kind of you name it. I have an interesting set of skills that kind of I've managed to develop over the years that can be pointed in different directions. So I'm a utility player, put it that way. So in this situation, I guess I had the right set of skills to be able to help understand and solve this problem. But this is one of those interesting ones in that this wasn't it wasn't just the HSE. So it was the HSE and the Department of Health and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and Garda Síochána and the Defence Forces were involved at the beginning. So you've got 5 different departments, plus the Central Statistics Office and Ordnance Survey were involved as well through the course of this. So this is very much a multi-agency, multi-department initiative. And the HSE are obviously the lead because we're responsible for delivering healthcare. But it's and so the team was and it was drawn from, the original team was drawn from people from each of those departments who had the right skills, who could help. And I guess we were lucky enough that we had people who were both had experience in app development, had experience in mobility, had experience with kind of data and analytics. So we had the right people in the room, and then finding the right partners as well. So we worked with a couple of organizations, Nearform being one, and Explio from a test perspective, and ISAS on the data protection and security side of it. So we had this team that was formed very quickly to build this, and we didn't know what it was at that time, because if you go back, and this is to track back, it seems all very obvious now looking backwards that of course we were building the COVID tracker app, and of course that was the way contact tracing was going to work. But at that point in time, Apple and Google weren't on the pitch. There were a variety of solutions. So we were scanning globally to figure out how people were solving for this particular problem. There were projects coming out of MIT in the States that was using GPS location to do it. There were projects kicking off in other places where people were using ad identifiers or using
tracking.
Other tracking. Yeah. I think, like I said, there were a variety of different ways. So if you look at the data sources that can help inform who was in contact with who, there's lots of different ways of solving for that particular problem. So we were looking at some of these, and obviously in the back of our heads, it's looking at this as a mass adoption out to the Irish population. So from that perspective, you've got to be satisfied that, are we just doing what we need to do, or is there a better way of solving for this particular problem? I think
so essentially at that point you had a problem to solve. You didn't know what the solution was. You knew it would be digitally supported or a digital driven solution. Did you even know it was going to be an app at this point? I mean, was that always the end game, that it needed to be something that ran on people's phones?
Well, it kind of became an app pretty quickly as we, and I guess if you look at that first week, so I started on the Wednesday, and I think we'd changed architecture twice by Friday. Right, so we were building geo big data, and then we were off building something else, and then we had, and this, I think it's a really fascinating piece to this is that we're not alone in that there are teams, and there's a me in lots of different countries globally now who are trying to build these apps. Now we know what we're doing, and we're all sharing with each other. And at that point in time, so the guys in the NHS in the UK, in NHSX, they had started building an app. It was a Bluetooth proximity based app, and then by Saturday, I think it was the 21st, Singapore. So Jason Bay and his team over in Singapore had released the Trace Together app, which was the first kind of mass proximity-based, Bluetooth-based contact tracing app that anybody had released anywhere. So they released that on the Saturday, and that resulted in this poor guy, Jason, being inundated by 40 countries, knocked on his door and said, "Can we have your code? Can you tell us what you've done?" And so it began this whole process. So we began looking at, okay, so proximity-based, using Bluetooth, how can we use Bluetooth to tell how far somebody is from someone else and for how long? And it's the how far and for how long, and is it for too long? So the guidelines for this go back. So if you look at the existing guidelines, come from the European Centre for Disease Control, ECDC, and it's within 2 meters for more than 15 minutes is the guideline. So our specification was find a way that you can detect people who are within 2 meters for more than 15 minutes, and that's kind of the core requirement from a contact tracing perspective, is to be able to do that. And looking at it from that perspective, there's lots of suboptimal solutions, but in terms of and there's also lots of more optimal, like, so if we had ultra wideband, we could do centimeter based, but not every phone has that. So you've got other capabilities.
So just some context, that like ultra wideband would only be available on some of the very, 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 very latest phones, and so that really wouldn't be a solution for widespread implementation. So I think just so I can keep in context the audience that we have here, like, I would love to talk about how you investigated ultra wideband, but given and essentially down to how you architected it. So we also want to keep it at a slightly higher level, but one of the things I would be curious about is that, so I think Bluetooth probably evolved as one of the most obvious solutions that would have come out of that initial investigation, if I'm correct. And you just then essentially needed a way to bring that together. So we're probably, as you said, you're only a week or two into the development process, where you're still, you've made a decision on technology technology, I would assume, and now you're trying to find a way to build it, or am I jumping too fast, too quickly?
I think it was one of those ones where there was a lot of, and I guess I think, so one of the practices that we have inside of this is to keep an architecture decision log. So of all the architecture decisions that were made throughout the course of it, to figure out what decisions are we making? So it's acknowledging that, understanding the consequences of those decisions, but also is this a reversible decision? So is this something I can back out of? Because some decisions you make are more difficult to back out of than other decisions over time. So we were making these decisions as we go, but a lot of it was very, very rapid fire. So the backend platform ended up being Amazon. Right, so it was AWS. So we've got AWS in the back end. So we understand the services that are there and the kind of things that we'll be able to do in terms of the capabilities that we need to build an app infrastructure around it. So we know we need to store data, so we need a database. We know we need to be able to send notifications or queue things and integrate and send them off to somewhere else. So we're building out this kind of these bits and these blocks of it. On the front end of it, at that point, we were trying to validate how do we do this? And there's kind of, you've got a couple of different choices from, and I'm not going to dive in too deep on this, but it's beacons versus core Bluetooth in terms of how you do it. And then we're looking at the actual reliability of these things. And one of the challenges we saw early on was, and this was directly from feedback, so we got into contact with the guys in Singapore pretty much straight away. And everybody was asking for, can we get your code? Can we get your code? And they had signaled that they were going to release their code as open source code, but it hadn't been released at this point. So we were basically reverse engineering from the design of their app what they had done. And then the guys were really good in terms of helping us understand what they'd done and the decisions. But there were some challenges with both Android and Apple in terms of either battery performance or background processing not waking up accurately or effectively. So basically you could end up with just devices being missed, and what you're looking for is pairwise interactions, and if they don't happen and a phone is kind of missed, then it's a challenge. So we were trying to figure out, are there ways, and there was some really like clever engineering stuff went into trying to figure out how do we get this to work in a reliable way. And it wasn't just us, there were teams in Germany, there was teams in the UK, there was teams in Italy, there was teams in Singapore and in Australia who were all sharing different ways. So we were basically would have these calls probably once a week to figure out, have you got it working? Have you got it working? Have you got it working? And people were making incremental progress on this. It did come to a point where it didn't look like there was an obvious solution. And at the same time, Apple and Google had signaled that they were going to release this Google and Apple or exposure notification system to provide this infrastructure to allow people to build apps on top of it. And I think that probably stems back to the Singapore guys were there in the first instance, and their requests in terms of how do we build apps like this. Google and Apple listened and built this infrastructure that allows them to do it in a way that both preserves the privacy of their users, but also creates a robust, reliable infrastructure that people can depend on. And I think the dependability of something like this is critical to it. So it's making sure that that's there.
I absolutely agree with that. I think for me, when the announcement first came that Google and Apple were getting behind this, right? So you've got two of the biggest, tech companies in the world, or the biggest tech companies in the world, saying that we're going to work together. We're going to figure out how to do this privately. We're going to figure out how to support the delivery of contact tracing, essentially, and simplify some of the steps. Because I think for the initial research that you guys had done, obviously would have required a tremendous development effort without provision of a solution from Apple and Google. So why don't we talk just a little bit about the Google and Apple API, because I don't think everyone really knows what an API is. I mean, we spoke about it before, like if I remember correctly, it's an application programming interface, but fundamentally I would describe that as enabling computers to talk to each other, or providing a service for computers to talk to each other, and for requests back and forth. But in the process of building the COVID tracking app for Ireland, when the Google API and Apple API was released, how quickly did you guys decide this was the solution for you?
We had several conversations at pretty high levels with Apple and Google the week before it was launched. And this is before the developer seed was launched.
Did you get Tim on the phone? Like,
yeah. Me and Tim are BFFs.
Tim Apple.
I was talking about Tim Willoughby. I think you're talking about Tim Cook.
Yeah.
But I think one of the so we'd had this ongoing conversation with both of those, well, with Apple prior to that, as we were trying to work through it, and they'd been really helpful on that front. They had made the announcement. We were trying to understand how this would work, and I think just to set the scene for this as well, there are, like, if you look at public health in general, public health has this idea of an index patient, and an index patient is this known person who is infected with a disease. So in this case, with COVID-19, and when you think about so when we were having original conversations in terms of what do we need to be able to do, it was with that in mind, and that's because that's the way that these kind of things have been done for generations. I know who that person is, I know who they were in contact with, therefore I understand the social graph that results from that, and I can trace through and track through on that. And that's kind of the prevailing view on that. That's since been called, so you'll hear in the media things being called centralized and decentralized. So that centralized view is where I know who the index patient is and I understand what the graph looks like of people and the connections between those people. And in normal public health work, that's how it works, right? So in any other disease, say it's measles or say it's TB or something like that, that's how it works. And in manual contact tracing, so if you test positive, that's what happens. You give that information, and that's the centralized view of the world. It ended up with this giant debate raging around the world around a centralized bad, decentralized good, and it lost all of the nuance. But basically, the decentralized view is that I don't know who the index patient is, which preserves the privacy of the index patient, and it allows me to notify people that they've been in contact, but in a privacy preserving way. So up until that point, we were basically following mirroring the model that was released in Singapore, which is built around this knowing who the index patient was. And we had there was as part of the onboarding process, you put a phone number in and we knew who you were and we could contact you and we understood the connections. Apple and Google, when they released this, they had determined that from a privacy perspective, the most privacy preserving way of doing this was to go with a decentralized model. Mm-hmm. And the decentralized model basically meant that nobody knows including the health authorities, don't know who anybody is. So people can be completely anonymous within this network. And that's how the app is built at the moment, that if you don't want the HSE to participate in your care at all, then you're completely on your own. You'll be notified if you're in close contact with somebody, but apart from that, there's no other participation and the HSE will not know about you. Well, I think that's one of the interesting things.
One of the things that comes up over and over again when you see the app mentioned in the media is the privacy piece. And that's and it's something that there was just echo in my headphones there for a couple of minutes. Very hard to form a question when you can hear yourself talking at the same time. But on the privacy side of things, I mean, fundamentally, Apple have built themselves a reputation for being a privacy-focused company. So leveraging that brand value in terms of releasing an API and being supported through usage in the HSE version of it, you kind of have privacy out of the door. But is there any additional steps that you've taken with the release of this app to ensure that it's it is private, it is secure, just to give people some reassurance on it?
I mean, we have, if anybody cares to read the data protection impact assessment, which is published up on GitHub, so github.com/HSE Ireland, you will, I think some of the feedback we've gotten has been very interesting because it's now, we're kind of a victim of our own success in that because we had spent so much time in determining the appropriateness, so how we should go about doing this and what's sufficient and making sure that we ticked the boxes from a data protection and privacy perspective, that it's become kind of but there's been a bunch of privacy people have turned around and privacy experts have turned around and said everybody should do it this way. So it's now a new bar. So, but it is actually I guess one of the challenges people have faced in the past is data protection and privacy is a difficult area, and it tends to get quite technical quite quickly. And I mean technical from a privacy policy perspective. It can get really detailed. And what we were doing, and because of the public scrutiny on this, every single piece of this was done with a view to making sure that we were as transparent as possible in terms of what we were doing, what data we were collecting, what we were doing with that data, where we were going with that, where that data was going, how long we were keeping that data, what it was for, and making sure that people understood both the data that we captured and what we were doing with it, but also from a privacy perspective, how we were protecting that. So what we were doing with that. And I've said it to many people during the course of this. This has had the most oversight from a data perspective for an app that has the least data I've ever worked on. Right, so it literally has nothing you don't want it to know. There's no excess fat in any shape or form in this. Right, we're capturing just the minimum. So if you decide you want to onboard in and use the app and never provide a single piece of information, you are free to do so. No metrics, no nothing. So we have made sure that each and every piece and each and every decision is yours to make, but also yours to undo as well. So the settings in the app, everything you've decided to do, you can undo or change. And that's been a very much, so the privacy by design gets talked about, and those three words get bandied about a lot. This is privacy by design in action. So this is how you do it and how it can be done. And I guess given the time frame, so we're 18th of March up until now, I think we had the app was published into the App Store on day 100. And released publicly on day 110. So that's kind of the full elapsed time from very beginning, from start to the point where it's released. So it doesn't have to take forever to do these things, and you can follow and adhere to the policies and do all of these things in a timely way, provided that you've got a good team who knows what they're doing and you can actually get the work done. I guess to go back to your question about how did we ensure it, it's literally bit by bit, data point by data point, processor by processor, understanding who, what, where, why, for how long, and just going through that, and it's breaking it all down. So ISAS were one of the partners who worked with us on this, and they've been it's a soul destroying process. As you're going, why do you need that? And it was like, well, we need it. And it was like, well, why do you need IP address? And I remember the conversations went, well, why do you need IP address? And I think the answer, and unfortunately it's the smart ass answer, because it's the internet. We need the IP address, but we don't do anything with it, and we get rid of it as soon as we can. So it's kind of dumped. And I think from that perspective, it's been a really rigorous process. We also, I think it's probably important to add as well that we had Science Foundation Ireland put together a series of research groups to help us. So we had one covering off analytics, we had one covering off kind of Bluetooth and proximity. We guys doing code review. We have people doing kind of ethics, user experience. So we had these other, and I'm probably missing one, so I'm sorry to any of the SFI groups that I've missed at this point, but we have this huge, so Ireland's research community came together behind, coordinated by Science Foundation Ireland, but to support us and enable us. So when we had questions, or if we needed somebody to go off and help and find something out, we had those, and we also had an original expert group who had convened to try and help the government in any way. And these were just private citizens who put their hands up, but then the research community has become incredibly useful to us to be able to reach out to and to ask questions, to figure out is there a better way, and to review things that are done through a range of different lenses. So I think that's kind of the scope of the work that we've done to try and make sure that it's private, that it's secure, that it does exactly that it does just what it needs to do.
So I think what's important to touch on now is that the development process was obviously rigorously scrutinized. And you checked a huge amount of boxes from privacy perspective. It's been massively successful. There's 1.3 million downloads at the moment. So we know, looking at statistics, typically somewhere between 20 and 25% of people that use any piece of technology have some level of disability. And that's typically around. So obviously, the accessibility of the COVID tracker app was something that we needed as the Ncbi. I wanted to make sure it was important. And I remember when you and I originally spoke, the words I would say to you is that I believe this app is, we need to make it accessible. It's not that we should. It has to be. So we, providing you as much feedback as we can is crucially important. So, I mean, at what point in the development process where did accessibility become the focus of the build, and making sure that, out of 1.3 million people, and you could probably say that 250,000 of those minimum are going to use some level of accessibility features on their phone. So how did that come up in the development process, and how did you kind of ensure that you were ticking all those boxes?
So I think there's two answers to that. So accessibility is there. So if I look at how we were evaluating the I guess the qualities of the system, so the quality attribute characteristics of this system. So we're looking at performance and reliability and scalability and usability. Accessibility are other aspects. So it's kind of it's standard practice to begin to look at that. But when you start digging into accessibility, I think there's two sides to it. In terms of good guidance around app design for accessibility, we were basically following web accessibility guidelines, and the UX guys who were working for Nearform with us on this were kind of following those, and the devs were doing what they needed to do. But it was one of those things that I think it was being done as we were kind of following the guidelines, but without the context. And I think the first conversations that you and I had, that kind of set the scene for me. And I think that was probably, it was in April, I think, at some point is when we talked. I think it was, around that time frame. Sorry, that time begins to morph. It's COVID time. So basically between March and now is probably about 3.5 years of real time for me. Yeah. But it all gets compressed. And I think at that point, the first conversation, and it was something that we were so busy trying to solve the proximity problems, and you put it into context very quickly, that contact tracing for somebody who has no sight is extremely different, because you can't say who you were with if you didn't know, and because you literally couldn't say, you couldn't explain. And so there were things like that and situations like that. So it totally changed the way we were thinking about it as a team with relation to the impact on specific users of the app that we had, because we were building an app for everybody and we were building it really fast. And I think that conversation kind of really shifted my thinking in terms of understanding the impact on specific groups and specific for people who have specific issues from a site perspective and from a general ability perspective. So we were kind of going through that process anyway, but this brought it to a point. And I think the expertise that you guys brought to the table, and I think the early conversations, and I won't paraphrase you, but it was more or less, so how bad is it, Karen? You go, it's not that bad. They weren't your exact words, but it's
I remember the word I used, but not appropriate for now.
And I was so happy you used that word and not another word. But we were kind of in that situation where we knew that we had done a job, but it wasn't enough. And then working with you and Sean and the other guys to go through and test it, and it's literally going through it, and it's going through it as with a deeper understanding that we could ever bring to it, and being able to play that back and feed through it, and trying to make and we had a fair few rows about whether we do or don't do it, and do we do this, and how, is that as important, or is this as important, and trying to trade it off, because we're looking at it from the point of view of trying to get something delivered, and there are trade-offs that are made all the time. And I guess you guys were great in terms of helping us understand the trade-offs we were making, because we're not making them on behalf or with knowledge, and you can help us understand from service users that you have in terms of what's important to them, and what's needed, what's required, what's a must have or must do for us. So I think some of those things that really changed the way we do it, and it's now embedded in the way we're thinking about the roadmap for the product as well. So accessibility is kind of at the heart of it.
Important. It's something that we through Kevin Kelly, who's our head of advocacy here in the NCBI, and myself talk about in great detail, is that what we advocate for here from a technical point of view in the NCBI is, to speak about done. People in technology talk a lot about done. Is a product done? And we always make the argument, well, it's not done unless it's accessible. So as you scale, the bigger you are, the more people are going to be impacted by your technology not being accessible. We worked with another company that has 5 million users a month, and I made the argument to him is that you're talking about building a platform. If it's not accessible, you could be looking at 25% of your client base. So imagine that almost 1 million people a month are saying that your product is unusable to them. So and it's more than 1 million, but I'm just rounding down for the sake of it. But the reality is that what we've tried to do through working with like the likes of yourselves, and that's why I said from the very start, given the importance of an application like this, it's fundamentally the definition of done is not achieved unless it's accessible. And I think it's something when we look at accessibility statements and things like that, it has to be a commitment to accessibility. So you embed it as part of your development process, you embed it as part of your definition of done, and you're willing to accept feedback from people with disabilities to give you that context. So you were, just to give people who are listening in some of an overview, there is accessibility guidelines that out there, and we do review them and we give feedback to companies like the HSE and others in terms of what there is. But there's also the reality of living with sight loss, or the reality of living with a disability. And there's also balances based on commercial need. For example, what we give a huge amount of feedback on in terms of this app is not only voiceover features, and I know they're because with voiceover it kind of works or it doesn't. There's a specific tab has a label that's read back to someone with sight loss, or it doesn't. But what's equally important is for people who are with limited or low vision, how they interact with the app. So there's guidelines around contrast, there's guidelines around the size of the text, supporting dynamic fonts, and sometimes that can be infinitely more difficult to get, to implement, because how an app is fundamentally built can make it very difficult to correct those. So what we did for Gar and the team in the HSE is we provided feedback on both of those things and said, here's all the issues that we've had. So in the NCBI, we had a pre-release version of the application, and we installed it on Android phones and iOS phones, and we purely provided feedback on how accessible it was. Can someone who uses VoiceOver exclusively actually use the app? And then we would break down that feedback into a level of priority. So if it's a critical, it means they can't use it because of a specific bug. And if it's high, it means it's blocking a specific feature, right down to medium and low. So if there's a workaround. And similarly, would take that approach for people with limited vision, like myself. I have maybe about 20% vision, a little less of late. But so how I would use an application would be very different to someone who's fully blind. But still, it's important that we drive for that level of inclusion on such an important app. So we provided all that feedback to Gar and his team, and I have to say, it was one of those things where you go through I've gone through this process probably 50, 100 times. I'm not even sure at this point, but it's all about keeping technology inclusive. And Gar and his team, I have to be honest, really took the feedback on board. It was something that we reviewed, I think, are multiple occasions, the list of accessibility issues, and with every release you see it getting slightly better, and some releases are big jumps forward in accessibility, and some are little jumps forward. And I think we got to a point here in the NCBI where it's not perfect. Let's call a spade, Gar. It's not. Mm-hmm. Right, we know there's some issues here, but the biggest and the most important thing that you and I have agreed on as kind of leaders in both organizations is that you've committed to make it accessible, and we've committed to support you in obtaining it to be accessible as it moves forward.
Yeah, and I think that is the key piece. It's you pay for the software and the bugs are for free, and I think even since we've gone live, so people find things once it's out to lots of people find new and interesting things. And it's everything from misspellings in town names, which is, and also town names that aren't there. There are certain towns.
But to be fair, that town name should be there. It's very much a town. Would you be referring to a place in West Dublin that you forgot?
Referring to a place in West Dublin with a very passionate group of people who wanted to be on that list. So it will be. So I think we have specific limitations. I can get into some of this stuff later on, but I think some of the things we're finding out now, they're going on the roadmap. We're just going to be working through them and trying to improve it. And for anything new that we're building into the app and anything new that's going to change it, it is core to it. And you're right, it is that idea of done. And for us, it's this constant piece of we're looking at it from a privacy first perspective and accessibility. So those are the two things that are kind of driving it. And if you take privacy, accessibility, and then it's the public health value of something like this, seeing it up and running and it's out there and it's actually contributing and augmenting the existing contact tracing that's running at the moment in the background. And that is the, I guess, just to, and I feel like we're blowing our own trumpets here, but it is one of those things, like we're the 5th country in the world to release an app on this technology, on the underlying Google and Apple API. And I think there was a lot of calls for, oh, it's not there and it's late. Like, we're the 5th country out there who's done it.
Yeah.
And we're kind of, it's up and running and out there. And we're one of 2 countries who, ourselves in Denmark, where it's fully integrated into contact tracing operations. So it connects into the back end. So it's fully connected end to end. So all of the contact tracing centers that were set up originally, this connects in and everything's connected to everything else. So it's not like this satellite that's sitting on its own. It's deeply connected in there, and that's kind of it's a very important piece, because this can't be seen in isolation. It augments the existing operations. It adds to it, and it should accelerate things and pick things up that wouldn't be picked up otherwise. And that's kind of really what it's for.
Well, I think that's a critical point, that in regard to the app, it's another tool that's used to overcome COVID-19. You know what I mean? Fundamentally, it's not the only tool. It's not the silver bullet. It's part of, it's part, and sometimes that leads very nice into accessibility, because using technology from an accessible standpoint, it's, you know what I mean, there's numerous things that someone with sight loss will use to overcome, mobility issues, or there's numerous things that might to sit and watch TV in the evening. And, this tracker app is another arm in defeating COVID-19 as far as I can tell, as a layperson. But I think what's important for the sight loss community is that isolation and not for people with sight loss is a real critical issue. And as you put it earlier on, people with sight loss might necessarily know who's around them. You know what I mean? If they are out and they're on a bus or they're in a cafe or something like that, or you know what I mean. So having another tool, on your phone that's sitting in your pocket that just works in the background is hugely important. One thing that I just wanted to make clear is that there's no obligation on people to download this app, Gar, is there?
No.
Yeah.
It's completely voluntary. It's completely opt-in, and it's all consent-based, which means you can withdraw at any time. And that's it is one of the things with something like this that we, like, from that perspective, there is no obligation on anybody, but what we're asking people to do is to stay safe and protect each other. So if you do test positive, I kind of feel like that from as a citizen, there's rights and obligations. So you kind of participate in that way. So if you've got the app installed on your phone, it means you can help people. Even if you don't know them, you can help people by letting them know. And it's not that everybody is going to infect everybody else, but if you do shorten that chain, so if we do find somebody and you come into contact, so you and I meet and you find out quickly, and it means you stay, you do the things that you're meant to do and you get tested, and it makes sure that we shorten that chain. It's really a critical piece in this to be able to stop and halt and contain the virus. And that's really what this is all about. It's just making sure that we can do that. And I think the Irish people have, they voted with their feet or with their phones and installed the app en masse. And I think in terms of app adoption, so we've been talking to both Google and Apple in terms just over our experiences over the past, because it's been a bit of a whirlwind. So we're kind of 7 days into it now. So the launch was this day last week. And so we're up running, things are happening, and it's kind of, it's running there in the background. So they're interested in our experiences with it and how we've been successful with this launch and what other people can learn from that in terms of what lessons can be learned from this, and what is it that made it more compelling. So what is it that got people up and activated them very quickly? So we're trying to figure out how do we help not just ourselves but others as well. And I think the other piece to add in this, and which is to bring it into the technology end of it as well, is that interoperability pops up as yet another thing for us to worry about now. So as borders are opening up and people are traveling, then it's important that we be able to interoperate with other people's apps. And as I said, there are me's, so there's somebody like Gar in every country at the moment building an app like this. So all over Europe, I think there's 16 or 17 different projects running. So at the moment, we've got Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, ourselves, and Italy who are up and running on this. Latvia, Estonia, there's a bunch of other countries that are kind of coming online. And as people start to move around and as people are traveling from different jurisdictions, building the interoperability infrastructure to make sure that when somebody arrives in from another country, that they can both be notified should they come into contact, and that we can be notified should they test positive. And that there are some significant challenges in terms of achieving that, but we're working through this, and it's Well, at the moment, there's a European interoperability effort to make sure that at a European level we can answer those questions. We've been working with colleagues in Northern Ireland as well, because obviously we have an island of Ireland problem that we have to solve here as well, and making sure that the 30,000 people a day who travel over and back across the border can be protected using an app here and an app in Northern Ireland that they've signaled that they'll be releasing.
I think selfishly, what I think is very important for our community, Garrett, and I think, as you've seen the importance of delivering an app that's accessible, that you also become an advocate for that accessibility as part of talking to your peers in the broader European community, where you can say, well, listen, we've spent this time to make our app accessible. We've seen adoption rates at a level that it's not exclusively, but in part successful based on the fact that it's usable by our entire user base, as opposed to 80% of the people who download it. So I think that would be something that I'd hope you would take away from the process, to say, you know what, accessibility needs to be part of your development, whether that's agile, whether that's waterfall, your definition of done needs to include an accessible application.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of the ways of doing that. So we've open sourced the code base for this, so you can see the practices in action, so you can see how we've designed and what we've done. So, and I think some of the challenges with this are just making sure that people, and it's really at a developer level, it's making sure that people understand what's required, what needs to be done, how is it done. So how do you do these things in the context of an app? So the code is there and it's open sourced under an MIT license. So we've had lots of people go to GitHub, download the code, fill their boots either from a security or privacy, and from an accessibility perspective, I think it'll be interesting to get people to look at it because looking at the app as an end user through the usage of it is very different than looking at the techniques and patterns that are used in the development of that app. So I think there's lessons to be learned there in terms of, and it's probably something you and I can talk about in terms of turning some of this stuff into a case study in terms of how it could be done or how it can be approached.
Yeah, we'd be happy to support and work together on that. I think what I'd like to do is...
Sorry guys, can I just jump in for just 1 second?
Just going to invite you in.
Yeah, great, thanks. I'm keeping an eye on the time here, so we're just a little bit short on time, and I'm just keen to bring in one or two questions maybe that have come in from service users, because it's been a really interesting interview. One of the things that's jumped out at me as this conversation has been developing has been very much the idea that for it to work, although it is a voluntary thing for anybody to download this, you want volume of people, if possible, to download it, but also to be able to use it properly. That's accessibility, and it's also addressing people's concerns about privacy. You don't want that to be a roadblock for somebody to actually go and use the app properly. And I think we've got one or two questions that just came in relation to usability. Maybe could I invite JP just to bring one or two of those user questions in?
Sure. So, if we focus on the questions that have just come in today, first of all, if that works. So the first one here is, can this app, Gar, be downloaded on your laptop, or do you need another device, such as a smartphone, for it to work?
So I guess I'd start with the Google and Apple exposure notification system only works on phones, so it'll only work on a phone device. So therefore, this app will only work on a phone device.
Okay, perfect. Gareth, just as you had mentioned, over the last week since the launch of the Kova Tracker app, so literally as you say, this day last week, we have asked service users to send any questions or comments they might have to the labs team. They'll come back with a few interesting questions, and I think some of them you might have actually covered already, but I'll just go through some of them that I have here. And I suppose many people are obviously wondering about security and privacy in relation to the Kova tracking app. So I know you've touched on this already when you were talking about the decentralized model. I was wondering, the question here that I have being asked is, how will the app protect my privacy, and where is my data stored?
So I guess let me start at the bottom and work up. So the Google and Apple exposure notification system, first and foremost, it's this isolated container on your phone. So it works independently of the app. So in order for it to be turned on, it can only be turned on by a public health authority, and only public health authorities can use it. So there's kind of a double lock that Google and Apple have with us and that we have with them. So we enable each other. Every day, you generate this ID that's stored on your device, that's stored securely and locally on your device on Android and on iOS. Every 15 minutes, it's called a rolling proximity identifier. So it's an ID that's derived from that daily key is produced, and they're the keys that get shared across. So they're the IDs that are shared between devices. So any device that sees each other, all it's getting is this random ephemeral ID that only lasts for 15 minutes and then it's gone, right? And so I'm storing it. So I'm storing my own key, my own IDs, and I'm storing the IDs that I pick up if I come into contact with another phone. That's all stored locally on your phone. It's not touching the HSE. It's not leaving your phone. It's staying on your phone. So that's at a very basic level.
Yeah, I think that'll be a very, very reassuring to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Just moving on to the next one, we have a question in which relates specifically to iPhone users. So someone has asked, will the COVID tracker app work on iOS 14 when this is made publicly available later in the year?
Yes, is the answer to that. So Apple have a roadmap for this, and we're following that roadmap. There are releases of the Google Apple Exposure Notification System, and they will be supported on future versions of iOS.
Okay, great. And just keeping on the theme of operating systems, Gar, another question that we received is it a case that the app can only be downloaded on newer smartphones running the more recent operating systems, or can it be downloaded also on older smartphones as well?
So I think there's two different answers to that depending on which particular operating system that you're going for. So on Android, it's everything from Android 6 and above, which goes back quite a way. So you've got anything that supports Android 6 and above, that's on the Android side of it.
Yeah.
And we know that from conversations with Google, we're pretty sure that they're looking at Android 5, so going back even further, but it's Android 6, which is still like a good chunk of old phones that are out there. Absolutely. On the iOS side, it requires iOS 13.5, and iOS 13.5 is only supported from the iPhone 6S and on. So the iPhone 6 doesn't support iOS. We're having conversations, other people are having conversations, and iPhone 6 users are a very passionate and vocal bunch. Mm-hmm. And so we are listening to that, and we're working to try and resolve these issues. Our app will actually install on it. It's the exposure notification system that doesn't install, and that's the challenge here. It's making those two bits work together.
I see what you mean. Just a general question in relation to how the app works. And I know you did touch on this earlier, but someone has asked, how long do phones need to be beside each other before they would record as a close contact, and also what distance are they monitoring? I think you did mention this earlier. I was saying about 15 minutes, Gar. I'm not trying to answer your question, but I think it was.
Yeah, so I guess the way this works is that if your phone picks up another phone that's got the app, it doesn't apply the 2 meters or 15 minutes at that point. So it just picks up traces of things as it's going through. So anything it picks up, so you could be at 3 meters, 4 meters, 5 meters, it picks it up. It's only if we get a random ID where you've had an exposure event to somebody, do we apply this? So it's at that point in time where we're downloading. So imagine your phone on average every 3 hours is downloading this set of IDs that people who've tested positive have uploaded to HSE servers. So it's pulling them down, comparing them, and it's only at that point do we apply the 15-minute 2 meter rule to exclude anything that doesn't match those criteria. So it's not done kind of on a pairwise basis where it's doing phone by phone. It's literally only when we're comparing it at that point in time where we're testing against an ID.
Yeah. Okay. Just two more quick ones here. Do I need to check in on the COVID tracker app every day? So is it best practice to check in on the tracker app?
So I guess there are a couple of different answers to that. If you start developing symptoms, absolutely check in because you can track the state of those symptoms. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's the first thing. If you haven't got symptoms but you're worried and you feel that and that you want to make sure that you do remember if you do develop symptoms, again, check in and do it. Right. I guess it's important to say that each of the different features in the app are independent. So there's no dependence between contact tracing and the COVID check-in. So they're independent of each other. So for contact tracing to work, I literally have to onboard onto the app and that's it. What you're doing by checking in is you're creating this national picture of what's going on in the country. So if we see lots of people down in, say, the south of the country are developing coughs or loss of sense of smell and taste, then it helps inform this national picture of what's going on and the development and progression of symptoms. So when you are checking checking in, don't think of it as just for you. You're actually informing a national picture as what's going on.
So there's a bigger picture there. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. If we have time for a couple more things, I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead there, Jude.
Yeah, so we probably have time just for maybe one more.
Okay, perfect. Well, actually, I just want to just run through
Taskmaster Jude.
there is one other query which I might just forward on to Gar, just in relation to a voiceover user who does find the app generally very accessible, but just wants to have a couple of queries. So I might forward that to you after the live event. But just 2 comments, because I think it's worth highlighting the positive feedback that we've received from this app as well from service users over the last week. One comment has come in from Dominique. She just said that I found the app very accessible with voiceover and would highly recommend others download today. One other comment to finish off on is I'm very happy with the app, which is more ammunition in this virus fight. Everyone with the wherewithal must sign up and be encouraged to do so, and then ask for feedback from William. So that wraps it up there. So thanks for answering the questions, Gareth.
No problem, and it's great to hear the feedback. And we're happy. So any feedback that comes in and any feedback you get from your service users, obviously we are listening, and we want to make sure that we can improve this as a product and make sure that it delivers the value that it needs to deliver.
Excellent. Thanks, Gareth.
Very good. We have just maybe a question from, I think, Daniel. Do you have a question as well?
Yeah, just when you're on the national picture section of the app, where it gives the latest data on cases that are on a county by county basis, is there any plans to expand that out? So let's say I can just view the cases by county, but let's say I want to kind of find out what's in my county. Let's say for somebody who's in Galway, right? Clifton is way out there on the west coast, and you could have somebody over in Ballinasloe right there on the eastern border, and like they are about 100 miles apart. So just from that point of view, is there any chance of the data will be able to be drilled down a bit more?
Sure. Well, I guess what we're drawing from there and the data you're seeing, and you can see the sourcing at the bottom of it, but it's pulling from GeoHive, which is the data hub used by the Department of Health. So CSO are involved in that as well. HPSC, which is part of the HSC. So we pull data from a number of different sources. It is one of those things that we are looking at in terms of, so anything that's publicly available and that we have access to, we can pull that data in there. And what we're working on at the moment is trying to figure out what's useful to people. So what questions is it helping them answer? What kind of ideas have they got around it? Because I know there are, when you see some of those numbers, it provokes a question. So what is that question, and how do we help answer that question? So this is part of their user research, and it's something that it's on my list of things to talk to you about as well. Mm-hmm. So we'll come back on that in terms of different uses for it. So we do have more data, and it's all, so if you Google GeoHive, you will find the public GeoHive site, and you can fill your boots with all the data that's out there that's publicly available. And there are other data sources that are there. So anything that's kind of publicly available that is coming from that has the right provenance, so it's coming from a source that we can credit, then we can pull it into the app and we can do something with that.
I think what's important, just from my perspective, just to mention, is that the relationship between the HSC and the NCBI, particularly in relation to this app, is we intend this to be ongoing. So if there's people within the sight loss community that do have additional feedback, we'll be maintaining that and giving that feedback back to GAR as the app progresses as well. And we hope to continue building on that and continue working that. So each of the subsequent releases not only fixes bugs that we found, but also, new features that are coming to make sure they're accessible, which I think is hugely important. But what I'd like to reiterate to all the listeners of this podcast and live event is that if you do find issues or you do have suggestions on the accessibility side, don't hesitate to email labs@ncbi.ie. We correlate all of the feedback that we get from our service users, and we make sure that feedback is either sent to GAR directly, or we maintain an issue log and accessibility log on behalf of our service users. So keep all that feedback coming into us, labs@ncbi.ie.
That's what I was just going to say. We did get a few emails in the past few days about that. We have it all logged and saved and ready to go for when we need it.
Yeah,
that's great. Very good. And just one last quick question. I think you've actually answered this, Gar, but I'm just thinking of it from the perspective of you obviously don't want this to be an app where there's any misconceptions or fears stop somebody using it. And I'm just thinking, you kind of have explained this, but when you're going onto it and you're checking in, if somebody was to, let's say I go onto it and I check in and I say I have symptoms now, Yeah, I can imagine perhaps some might worry that, well, if I trigger this and I'm not feeling too bad really, if I trigger this, is this going to suddenly be the thing that triggers maybe messages going all around to people that I've been with? I think you've kind of covered this already, but
yeah, it won't. So no, nothing like that happens. So in order for you to get warned, to get a close contact warning, it has to be on the basis of a positive test result from the HSE. So it's completely independent of the COVID check-in, which is the symptom tracker feature of it. But in order for you to get a warning, nothing will happen on the back of that. That data gets shared. It gets given to the HSE. We give it to the CSO. It gets pushed into GeoHive, and it's an anonymous bundle of data that helps us visualize. So over the next couple of weeks, we're working on kind of heat maps for the country to show the progression of symptoms and try and understand and identify hotspots from a symptomatic perspective. So that's where that goes, but it doesn't go anywhere near, or it doesn't impact contact tracing at all. So if you put in, I would recommend you put in your symptoms accurately. So put in your symptoms as you feel them, record them in that way, and be sure that the only way you're going to get a close contact warning is if you have come into contact with somebody who has tested. And this is the important piece: you have to have, in order for you to for your IDs to be shared with everybody else, you've got to get a positive test from the HSE. So you've got to have tested positive and upload them from your phone. So you go through a process. So there's a control on that. So it's not just throwing in symptoms. In other jurisdictions, people have looked at self-diagnosing based on symptoms. In Ireland, it's based on a positive test only.
Yeah, very good. It's good to kind of clarify that as well, and appreciate all the clarity that you've given us to that. It's been really interesting just hearing the whole development process and all of the considerations that had to go into that. Appreciate your comments there, Garrett, and thanks for joining us. And similar to Kyron as well, thanks for joining us again on the live event to go through that. Obviously, as we've been mentioning, it's vital that if people do have questions, please do get back in touch, because we're here to provide support, obviously, but we can also feedback anything that's particularly relevant that needs to go back to Gar, the team there as well. So please do send in any of your feedback or your comments or your questions. Still, we can still address those. So thanks very much for covering that.
Can I just say one last thing? I'd just like to thank the team on the NCBI side of it, because I mean, you guys contributed significantly to this app, and thank you all for all of the efforts you put in throughout the process. So thanks again.
Brilliant, much appreciated.
I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, us too.
Great stuff. Very good. So thanks again to Gar McCreasta and to Kyron O'Mahony, and again, do feedback any comments that you have in regards to that. So what we're going to do now is just we mentioned that we have an interview to finish off our program. It should just fill the remaining time just nicely. So we'll go straight into our interview. Last week we were talking to Stuart Lawler, who is obviously a very experienced techie, but we're going to be hearing now from someone who describes themselves as definitely not an IT ninja, but still they've managed to find technology to be very helpful in different areas of their life. And this week, Seeing It Your Way, JP has been talking to Mark Kehoe.
Okay, so I'm delighted to be joined today by Mark Kehoe. And Mark, you're very welcome to our live event.
Thanks very much, JP.
Great to have you with us. So Mark, before we have a chat about your own use of technology in your day-to-day life, I suppose, what I thought we could do is just take a step back for a moment, and you could perhaps tell us a little bit about your own story and background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem at all. I originally I lost the eyesight when I was 19. I was trained to be a chef. I was kind of halfway through that. I'd done me 2 years at London doing professional cookery and doing my work experience then. And then I lost the vision down to probably 7 or 8% within a 2-week period. So I quickly learned that chefing had to be no longer kind of a future career for me. So after that, then I went straight into the training centre in National Council for Blind there with you guys, and I done a 9-month course there where I was first introduced to the world of jobs. And and different Zoom texts and things like that. But JAWS was the one that was most beneficial to me, that worked for my eyesight.
Yeah, and this is around 19, Mark, you were at that age.
Yeah, 19, year 2000 now, so nearly.
Yeah.
I'm 19 years now in the civil service, so I've done a few years in different retraining and education. Started with a 9-month course in Ncbi, 9 months in Roslyn Park, and then I joined the civil service then in 2001 as a clerical officer.
And you were in the training centre for a while at the Ncbi. I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about what you did there, Mark?
Yeah. So all the other, like the content there, I learned Braille. I was definitely much better at writing it than reading it. I used to find it was quite tricky for me, because I come from a chefing background. You handed it burnt, I wouldn't have the sense of touch required for Braille, yes. But I enjoyed it. I remember Donna was teaching me that. That was a long time ago now.
Yeah. No,
and then I done kitchen skills, and I think I gave the instructor a heart attack there, because I was doing the knife we were using could have been sharper, so I just took another knife out of the drawer and started sharpening it. And I gave the instructor a heart attack, and so it's not that on. We had some great chats about my experience in cooking and different restaurants I've worked in. So it's been great fun working in there.
Excellent.
Doing classes, and then done the training course there with actually Emer Mulhall. Was the IT instructor there at the time. Yeah. I remember Stuart also was in there, and that's where I first got the introduction to JAWS software. Actually, that's where I got my first PC, and then following on year to there, my first laptop from National Council Line. So it was a cool days, I think, was the grand scheme back then.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was great. Absolutely great opportunity.
And Mark, you would have started using JAWS at that point then, would you, for the first time?
Oh yeah, I remember learning touch type, finding the home keys, and it now just comes to me on a daily basis, because I use computer for work now every day,
every day.
So I'm still making errors though. The email was still laughing now. She's seeing some of the errors I made.
like the rest of us. So Mark, and you said in 2001 then you became a clerical officer. So I wonder, could you talk about maybe what happened then, and I suppose your career progression since 2001 till now?
Yeah, and actually, in fairness, it was Anne Smith who gave me a hand to apply for the clerical officer in the civil service, and she gave me great help with the interview preparation, and got the job in the civil service then through done my actual entrance test via JAWS. And for the public appointment service, they're really good. They make it so accessible to people with disabilities, and I strongly recommend it to everybody. It's a great source of employment, great opportunity.
Right, it's so important.
Yeah, I joined the civil service, clerical officer in 2001, and it's really great opportunities there. I'm an assistant principal officer in there now, and great opportunities for training. I've done my degree at night time in the IPA through the course, through the job, and for education in the King's Inn in procurement law for my own current role.
Okay.
So, it's a fantastic opportunity. And again, all kind of fueled by technology and JAWS software.
Fantastic. I wonder, could you give us a bit of an overview of your day-to-day role while you're working now?
Yep. Well, at the moment, obviously, this COVID lockdown, I'm actually working from home, and I just have my laptop and keyboard and straight access into the government network, so I have full access to all my contacts, my drives, my files. So I'm a key account manager in the Office of Government Procurement, and my main role is just to assist public sector bodies to utilise centralised contracts for goods and services. So it helped them with our procurement strategies for the next 2 years, bit of training, planning, things like that, all around public procurement. It's interesting, every day is different.
And Mark, is your role mostly desk-based, or would you occasionally be meeting clients outside of the office as well?
I would be out of the office quite a bit. I have face-to-face meetings, I do presentations, deliver some kind of a training for around different parts of procurement, the thresholds, things like that. And again, technology is a fantastic assist there for me. Use PowerPoint for presentations. I use a lot of graphics for PowerPoint because I can't see the detail on the slides, but I see large images, so I know if the one with the 4 blobs is the 4 principles. So I know once I see the 4 blobs, I know I can discuss that then. And the next one will be one image in the middle, so I know what each slide is. I can talk about it then. I can see the outline of the slide, but I can't see the details. So once I know what slide it is, I can talk about it then.
You know then. And are there other applications you've used as well, Mark? So like you use PowerPoint, obviously you're using Outlook, I presume, would you, for mostly?
Outlook, yeah. Most of my work is done by email and phone and face-to-face meetings. Using things like the Maps app on the iPhone. That's fantastic. If I'm going to a client for the first time, I put in their address and get directions, but I have a fair idea where it is. But just even things for finding the actual door to the entrance. The talking directions are fantastic. The bridge is practically outside. And once you're there first time, it's grand after that. Then.
You know them. So that's really interesting because I know we had a piece on our last live event on apps for navigation. So that's great. So you're using Google Maps to find certain offices for the first time. After that, you become familiar with where they are.
Yeah.
Excellent. And speaking of your phone, Mark, what kind of phone are you using? Are you using iPhone or Android?
I recently got a new iPhone there. I was in the 5 for years, and then just went there recently. So I got the iPhone 8. And I love it. It's absolutely brilliant.
Nice phone.
I wasn't able to get the audio on my old phone, and like audio for audiobooks is fantastic. It's great access to information there. So it's great. Yeah.
Yes. And do you listen to audiobooks, Mark, as well?
Yeah. Like Richard Branson, I read a couple of his books. I was doing some study. I'd get them in audio as well.
Audio. Excellent.
And podcasts are fantastic. For my I done my degree at night time in public management, so a lot of management stuff and economics. So the podcasts are absolutely fantastic because once it's audio, they have to give you a fantastic description of what's going on. So it's a great way of accessing information.
And Mark, are there other applications that you would use on your iPhone to help you maybe in just kind of day-to-day things, like say for example any OCR apps that might read text for you or anything like that maybe?
I wouldn't use them too much. I think obviously the banking online. If I was going to a restaurant, I normally go on to online, read their menu beforehand. I don't use the OCR ones much to be honest. I use the Notes app quite frequently. If I'm at a meeting and I'm taking a few notes, I might use the Notes app on the iPhone. Again, the podcast, I use that quite a bit. I'd use WhatsApp an awful lot, so I'd have different groups of contacts, whether for work even. So rather than having to type large amounts of text, I just do voice messages to my contacts at work. And most of them just respond back that way because it's much easier rather than typing. It's really, really good now.
So you're liking the iPhone 8 anyway? You give it a thumbs up?
Oh, it's brilliant. I'm only using it probably 10% of its ability. I'm definitely not a guru or a IT ninja, but it's some great contacts, great things online, some resources. I'd often rang yourself to get some assistance on the iPhone, or chat rooms online. You get some good solutions there. I know I'm not definitely not maximising the capability of the phone, but I'm slowly getting my head around it.
Get your head around
you can do.
And Mark, I suppose just maybe to change the subject slightly. I know that you were hugely involved in many of Ncbi's fundraising campaigns throughout the years, and I'd just like to acknowledge that because I know you did some great work raising funds for Ncbi and as many of your family members. I suppose throughout this time, you were hugely involved in cycling and tandem cycling. And I know you've achieved a lot in that regard. You've besides raising so much funds, you've raced throughout Europe on a tandem. You've cycled stages of the Tour de France. I know from chatting to you previously that you represented Ireland at the Paralympic Games in Athens in 2004. I mean, these are huge achievements. And I wondered, do you have any kind of sporting highlights that you could tell us about? Anything that really kind of stands out over your cycling career, I suppose, that you really enjoyed and look back on with kind of great happy memories?
Well, definitely cycling with our good self on the 4 Cities challenge. That was absolutely brilliant. We've done that a couple of times, so we certainly enjoyed that, and I enjoyed our chat. I've been really lucky. I've done some fantastic events through the Blazing Saddles and Eamon Duffy organising those events. First being in Malaysia, then California, South Africa. But definitely the highlight for me was doing the 6 stages of the Tour de France with me pilot Carl Ncbi, and Sean Kelly came with us. So that was two tandems in that, myself and Billy Shannon, and Dennis Toomey was the other pairing on tandem.
Yes.
28 soda bikes and 2 tandems, but that was definitely by far one of the best achievements I'm really proud of. And that was the year before the Paralympics in Athens, and some fantastic training. But definitely mentally the hardest thing I've ever done was the 6 stages.
I can't imagine how difficult it must have been going up the some of those alpine climbs on a tandem, Mark. I really can't, or Dane for that matter.
And you've done some of them. You've done some of them with Siobhan. I know that.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Exactly. Great. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely, it's brilliant. Like,
and Mark, what about Athens? I mean, sort of thinking about even to the opening ceremony of the Athens Olympics 2004. I mean, that must have been fantastic as well to walk out and have your family there and watching on.
I remember we're doing the opening ceremony, and I remember Dennis Toomey beside me, and my family weren't to come over, so I said goodbye to the airport, and then Dennis said, your mother wants to talk to you, she's on the phone, and then I realised that they'd come over a few days after I left, and we were in the crowd. That was a really nice surprise. So it's definitely a thought that stays with me today. That was an amazing experience, and it was great to hear like Ireland being called out, because myself and Ian and Dennis Toomey, Ian Mahon and Dennis Toomey, we were the first Irish cycling athletes to compete in the Paralympics. And then some great cyclists came on behind me then, and we got top 10 then in various ones, and then we got 6 medals then in London. So it was a great opportunity to take that foundation, and some really good cyclists came behind me then. So fair play to them.
And Mark, I know I mentioned about the fundraising that you've done for Ncbi over the years. I mean, there's obviously so many charities out there you could have raised funds for. Was there any particular reason you did choose to raise funds for Ncbi in particular?
Well, in fairness, when I lost majority of my eyesight when I was 19, it was a huge change in my life. And to be fair, I got so much out of that training course back in 2000. I remember Anne Smith and some really great people there, and it was a fantastic opportunity. They showed me there's way more out there now than. I was like suddenly shocked and changed, lost of eyesight, whereas now there's so much more to do, and just showed the new skills to get on with life and go again. And then that was kind of the foundation, like for my training, education, career, other interests, like the cycling that came out of Ncbi as well. Fantastic friends that I'd be still meeting on a daily basis. I'm very loyal to Ncbi. Other charities I often do a bit of work with is the guide dogs. We do a quiz every year for Ncbi. And the guide dogs stop normally every Holy Thursday, but this year it was went online for COVID.
Did you hold it online?
I'll come back next year. I was not online, but it wasn't near as successful because
of course
you can't really sell tickets online for the last where you have to make the money.
And Mark, how did you? Conscious, like even some of the fundraising targets for these events, they're quite significant. You know, particularly the ones overseas. Like, how did you manage to raise funds? Like, did you, for example, do any kind of online campaigns, like My Charity or anything like that?
That's it. Yeah, My Charity stuff, that's a great source for just getting the message out there, putting up photographs. That's what we're doing. We put up the roof, we put up the profile of the mountains. So it made it very real. They've seen what we're doing. And then just give them kind of updates on our training, because the training was like savage. And so the money definitely came in. Then we've done events as well, like the quiz and things like that. And social media is a fantastic source of getting information, access, sending out links. So IT definitely played a good role in getting the message out there of what we're doing and how people like that can support. So it's been fantastic then.
And Mark, I wonder, could you give us any kind of situations that you would currently find technology useful in kind of in your day-to-day life? You know, at the moment, obviously there's work, but maybe from a kind of social perspective, outside of work, where you might use technology. You mentioned WhatsApp earlier. I mean, you're using WhatsApp. Any social media? So,
I use Facebook a small bit. WhatsApp is the main one for me. Again, if I was going meeting some friends and we're going to a restaurant, I definitely Google the menu online. Even getting directions to restaurants, sometimes you can get the address and directions to different various restaurants. What other ones? Social ones. I wouldn't be huge on Facebook. I don't use it a whole lot, to be honest. It's handy, or it's great for getting the information out there, but the quizzes and things. I use it for the cycling ones, like map my walk, map my cycle, things like that. Strava, that's a really good one for measuring your cycling.
Excellent. So actually, technology would have had some role as well, you know, in terms of your when you're playing sport and cycling as well, Mark.
Oh, hugely so. Fantastic for mapping your training, your average speed. If you're doing the same route all the time, you can see what speed or what time you've done the previous week, the previous month. So you can see any improvement there. So
that's interesting, Mark. And how does that work now with something like Strava now? Like, how would you map your ride if you wanted to do that now with something like Strava?
Yeah, it tells you the calories burnt. It gives you the history of what rides you've done. I tend to use Excel as well, because I want to map. What mileage every week, the profile, the meters climbed. I would use Excel as well a bit for that. I know you can pay for the Strava one and get the pro version, and there's way more kind of information available then.
And Mark, what about at the moment with COVID and so on? We're all a bit restricted with the lockdown, but I know you're trying to go out and do a bit of walk at the moment, and so sometimes you were saying you might kind of keep track of your steps and so on, and have to give yourself targets each day. I wonder how are you eventually to do that, to keep record of the steps and so on?
Well, definitely with the lockdown, I wasn't doing as much walking because I was walking there to work. But as I found definitely a few COVID kilos, so like around 6 or 7 weeks ago, I said, right, time to up the steps. So and I'm daily target of 15,000 steps. So that's really good now.
That's
back doing that.
And you're managing to reach that most days.
In fairness, I went for a big walk before work, and then after work is a nice way to end. If you're working from home, it's nice to go for a walk around 5:30, and then when you come back into your walk, you're not working anymore. Then with COVID though, like Netflix, the audio description on Netflix is absolutely brilliant. So that's really, really good.
I think a lot of our listeners will be watching Netflix, particularly over the last 2 or 3 months.
It's been a great help them getting through COVID now, in fairness. And we're surviving now, in fairness.
And Mark, before we finish, I wonder, would you be able to offer some advice to, say, someone who might be new to technology, who has sight loss, and maybe they just want to get started with it, maybe on their mobile phone or on a computer? Would you offer any kind of general advice to them?
I would say don't be afraid of making mistakes with it, because when I got the first iPhone, I was all over the place with it. So you can't break it. Just go in, try different things, and you'll learn that way. If you get stuck on something, stick into Google. There's nearly always the answers there. Don't be afraid to use your network of friends, ask them for input. And then with regard to employment and accessibility in IT there, when I start a new job or a new role, I give the heads up to the hiring manager or your line manager and say, I have vision impairment, I use this software to do this and this. Here's where I foresee the challenges, and here's the solution I'm proposing to get around this. So you're going to the employer with a solution as opposed to going with a problem. Publicjobs.ie, I definitely recommend the job career and civil service. Absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it now.
Excellent.
Definitely no IT ninja, but it helps me every day in my day-to-day work, social life. Definitely great assistance to me now.
Yes, it's been clearly from our conversation that has been, Mark. So, Mark, I have to say it's been great talking to you today, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, I think they're going to be able to identify with a lot of what you've spoken about here. and I've no doubt benefit from much of your advice too. So again, thanks very much for joining us.
No problem at all. Thanks, Will.
So our thanks again to Mark Kehoe there. I don't think my step tracker is approaching anywhere near 15,000 steps a day, unfortunately. But other than that, I really enjoyed. Other than that reminder, I really enjoyed that interview. And of course, a reminder that if you want to catch that interview again, along with all the other content in our live shows, that can be accessed in our various podcasts or on YouTube as well. So our thanks again to Mark Kehoe there. And as always, if today's show has triggered any questions that you might have about technology, or you need support in some way with software or hardware, please do call the technology support line on 1850 92 30 60, or you can email labs@ncbi.ie. And remember, of course, that there's also a wide range of different NCBI services where they can provide support. So if you want to access that support, you can contact our national helpline on 1850 33 43 53, or you can email us at info@ncbi.ie. That's info@ncbi.ie. But for today, we're just about at the end of our live event. Just enough time to let you know what we'll be looking at in the coming weeks as well. So we're going to be looking at our Braille technology. That's what we're going to address next week. We're going to have a few demonstrations actually of some of the technology that's involved there. We're going to be looking at accessible household equipment as well. We mentioned that last week as something that would be, maybe there's a few little gaps in that at the moment, but it'll be interesting just to see what is available in terms of accessible household equipment. And we'll be looking at typing tutors as well in the future. If you want to keep up with what's coming up in future live events, you might want to sign up for our newsletter to keep you informed. So you can visit our website at www.ncbi.ie and just go to our technology page, or you can email labs@ncbi.ie. So all that's left for me to do is to thank our contributors once again. Appreciate hearing from Gar McCreasta about that really important app. It certainly had a lot of take up already in its first week for the COVID Tracker Ireland app. So it was good to hear about the development there. And thanks again to the panel as well, and all those involved in getting the show up and running. And we look forward to seeing everyone again next week for the next NCBI Labs live event.